Alright, so this happened last summer, and honestly, it's something I still can't wrap my head around. My buddy Mike and I decided to go camping for a weekend up in the Sierra Nevadas. We were both going through some stuff, work stress, breakups, the whole adulting thing. We figured getting out into nature, away from all the bullshit, would be good for us. We packed up my old Subaru with the essentials: tent, cooler, a couple of cases of beer, and just enough snacks to survive on hot dogs and chips for 2 days. We weren't exactly Bear Grylls, but we knew how to handle ourselves in the woods, or at least we thought we did. So we hit the road Friday afternoon, hoping to snag a good spot before the weekend rush. It's about a 3-hour drive from LA, and by the time we got there, the sun was just starting to set. We found this awesome little clearing right next to a lake. It was perfect, no other campers in sight, just us, a sky full of stars, and that sweet smell of pine trees. We set up camp, cracked open some beers, and spent the night just chillin'. Mike was playing music off his portable speaker, and we were joking around like old times. For a while, it felt like all that stress just melted away. Everything was just perfect. Around 11 p.m., we started hearing these weird noises from the woods behind our tent. At first, we thought it was just some animal like a deer or maybe a raccoon sniffing around for food, but it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was this low, grumbling noise, almost like someone was talking, but in a really guttural, muffled way. I was like, dude, it's probably just some forest animal. But Mike wasn't buying it. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the trees. Nothing. The noise stopped as soon as the light hit the woods, so we laughed it off, finished our beers, and called it a night. We crashed in the tent, and I swear I was out cold within minutes. But sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up to this crunching sound, like twigs snapping right outside the tent. My heart was racing, and I could hear Mike stirring next to me. He whispered, "Did you hear that?" And I was like, "Yeah." What the hell was that? We stayed dead silent, straining to hear, and then we heard it again, this low voice, almost like someone was mumbling to themselves. It was definitely not an animal. It sounded like a person, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Mike grabbed the flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. I was holding my breath, trying not to make a sound, but when he turned the light on, there was nothing. Just trees and shadows. The noise stopped again, like whoever or whatever it was knew we were watching. "Bro, let's just go back to sleep," I said, trying to brush it off like it was no big deal. But honestly, I was freaked out. Mike just nodded, but he kept the flashlight close, just in case. The next morning, we woke up to find our cooler knocked over, and all our snacks were scattered across the ground. At first, I thought maybe a bear got into it, but there were no claw marks or anything, just footprints. But they weren't normal footprints. They looked almost like human prints, but weirdly misshapen, like someone was dragging their feet or something. Mike was all, "Nah man, we're not staying here another night. Let's pack up and find a new spot." I wasn't about to argue with him. The whole place was giving me bad vibes at that point. We threw everything into the car and drove further down the road to find another campsite. We found a spot about 10 miles deeper into the woods, this time a bit closer to the main trail. It wasn't as secluded as our first spot, but at that point, we didn't care. We just wanted to feel a bit safer. Everything was cool for most of the day. We went for a hike, fished a little in the lake, and even managed to shake off that creepy feeling from the night before. By the time the sun set, we had almost forgotten about it. Almost. We were sitting around the fire, just chilling, when we heard footsteps. Not like the light, random steps of an animal. These were heavy, deliberate, like someone was walking right up to our camp. Mike grabbed his flashlight again, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He shone it straight into the trees, and that's when we saw him. This guy, at least, I think it was a guy, was just standing there, maybe 30 feet away, staring at us. He was wearing this ratty old jacket, and his hair was all matted, like he hadn't showered in years. But the creepiest part, he was smiling. Just this wide, freaking grin, like he was in on some joke that we weren't a part of. I was like, "Hey man, you good?" Trying to sound calm, but my voice was shaking. The guy just kept grinning, not saying a word. Mike was ready to bolt, and honestly, so was I, but then the guy just turned around and walked back into the woods. No explanation, nothing. Just disappeared into the darkness like he was never there. We were both on edge the rest of the night, jumping at every little sound. But somehow, we managed to get a few hours of sleep. The next morning, we packed up and decided to cut the trip short. We were done with this place, but here's where it gets weird. On our drive back, we stopped at this little gas station to fill up, and Mike went inside to grab some snacks. He came back out looking pale as a ghost. I was like, "What's up?" And he just handed me this old newspaper he found on the counter. There was an article from a few years back about a missing hiker, a guy who was last seen up in the same area we were camping. They found his body months later, but here's the twist. He had been dead for at least a year before he was even reported missing. The description of the guy in the article: ratty jacket, matted hair, smiling. We just looked at each other, both of us thinking the same thing, but too freaked out to say it. Was it his ghost or something else entirely? I don't know, man. But I do know one thing: we're never going back there again. So, me, my wife, and our 3 kids, we decided to head up to Franconia Notch in New Hampshire for a week of camping. We packed up everything: tents, coolers, sleeping bags, you name it, and drove up from Pennsylvania. We figured it'd be nice to get away from it all for a bit, let the kids run around in nature. The first couple of days were awesome. We went to see the basin, hit a bunch of trails, did some sightseeing. The Ridge Trail was a real workout, but the views made it worth it. Kids had a blast, especially when they found a spot to mess around by the water. Weather was perfect, sunny, warm, just about as good as it gets. Then, on the second night, things got interesting. We had gotten back to camp pretty late after one of those long hikes. We were starving, so we cooked up some dinner, did the dishes, and started putting everything away. It was just starting to get dark, that time when the forest gets real quiet. I was outside making sure we packed all the food into the car so we wouldn't attract any animals. Next thing I know, I hear this rustle behind me. I turned around, and boom, there's this huge black bear standing like 5 feet away from me. I'm not kidding. I could have reached out and touched its nose if I wanted to. My brain just froze up. My wife and kids were in the tent, completely unaware that I was staring down a bear. I had this big metal pot in one hand and a spoon in the other. And before I could even think, I started banging them together right in the bear's face. The noise was crazy loud, and for a second, I thought the bear was either gonna run off or come at me. Luckily, it took off into the woods. I thought I was in the clear, but nope, less than a minute later, it was back. So I did the same thing, just went nuts banging that pot again. This time, I didn't wait. I walked toward it, clanging away like a lunatic. Finally, it gave up and disappeared for good. But man, my heart was racing for hours after that. Now you'd think that was the scariest part of the trip, huh? Nope. The real nightmare was yet to come. The last night of our trip was the 4th of July. We spent the whole day exploring, then drove into town to watch fireworks with the kids. It was one of those perfect summer evenings. Hot, clear skies, fireworks popping off, kids having a blast. We got back to camp pretty late, just ready to crash. Everyone was exhausted, but right around midnight, the weather did a complete 180. Out of nowhere, this storm blew in no warning, no nothing. First, the wind picked up, then the rain started coming down so hard it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the tent. Water was getting in under the rainfly, so I grabbed my oldest son and we rushed outside to throw a tarp over the tent. The wind was wild. Huge branches were snapping off trees and flying through the air like spears. Some of those trees were bending so low I thought they were gonna come down on top of us. I looked around and it was chaos. People in other campsites were bailing, jumping in their cars and speeding off. Tents were getting ripped right out of the ground, just flying off into the woods like balloons. I knew we had to stick it out because, well, home was 14 hours away in Pennsylvania, and I wasn't about to leave all our gear behind. So we just hunkered down, holding the tarp in place while rain and wind pounded us. I couldn't sleep a wink. I just kept staring at those trees, waiting for one to come down on top of us. All night long, it was just survival mode, pure adrenaline. By the time the storm finally let up, it was early morning. I stepped outside and the campground looked like a bomb had gone off. Telephone poles were down, trees were everywhere, and the road was a mess. We packed up what we could, muddy and exhausted, and hit the road. Driving back was a whole different kind of nightmare. I was dead tired, but we had to get home. Made it to this little farm in Vermont and had to pull over because I couldn't keep my eyes open. My wife took the kids into the farm store to look around while I just leaned back in the driver's seat and passed out cold for an hour. Woke up, still groggy, but somehow managed to power through the rest of the drive. Looking back now, it's one of those stories we laugh about, like, remember that time we almost got eaten by a bear and blown away by a storm? But at the time, man, it was intense. Franconia Notch is a beautiful place, but it'll keep you on your toes, that's for sure. I was in my late 20s when this happened, a couple years back when I decided to camp alone up near the Appalachian Trail. I'd been feeling burnt out from work, so I thought a weekend away in the woods would be just what I needed. I hiked a few miles off the main trail, found this perfect little spot where I couldn't hear or see another soul, set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and just kicked back. Spent the day hiking around, checking out some streams, enjoying the fresh air. Everything was going great. Around dusk, I made myself some dinner, just some beans and hot dogs over the fire. By the time the stars came out, I was feeling pretty good. The whole place was quiet, except for the crackling fire and the sound of crickets. I figured I'd hit the sack early, so I doused the fire, crawled into my tent, and called it a night. Now, it was probably around midnight when I heard the sound of twigs snapping, like someone walking through the woods. At first, I thought maybe it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but then I heard this voice, real faint, like someone crying. I unzipped the tent, peeked out, and my heart just about stopped. There was a woman stumbling through the trees toward my campsite. She was a mess, her hair all tangled, clothes torn up, and she was barefoot. She was crying, gasping for breath, like she'd been running for her life. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and called out, "Hey, you alright?" She practically collapsed when she reached my campsite, just falling to her knees. She kept saying, "Please, you have to help me," over and over. Her eyes were wide, wild, darting around like she was expecting something to jump out of the shadows any second. I was honestly freaked out. Was out there in the middle of nowhere, and this woman just shows up in the dead of night, looking like she'd been dragged through hell. I didn't know what to think, but I wasn't about to leave her out there alone. I helped her over to the campfire, which I quickly got going again. She was shivering like crazy, even though it wasn't that cold out. I tried asking her what happened, but she just kept saying, it's coming, like she was in some kind of trance. I tried to get more out of her, but she was too freaked out to make much sense. She kept looking over her shoulder like something was about to jump out of the woods and grab her. That's when she grabbed my arm and said, "You have to get me out of here, please." So I made a split-second decision. I wasn't about to just leave her there, and if something was really after her, I sure as hell didn't want to find out what it was. I packed up my stuff as quick as I could, threw everything in my backpack half-assed, and told her to follow me. We hustled back to the trail where I'd parked my truck. The whole time I kept hearing noises behind us, like branches snapping, like something was following us. She was practically dragging me. I was sweating bullets trying to shine my flashlight behind us every few steps, but I didn't see anything. When we finally made it to my truck, I was shaking so bad I almost dropped my keys trying to unlock the doors. We jumped in, and I peeled out of there like a bat out of hell. She was curled up in the passenger seat, still crying and mumbling, "Thank you, thank you." I drove like a madman down those winding mountain roads until we hit the nearest town, which was like 30 minutes away. I kept trying to ask her what the hell happened, but all she would say was, "I just had to get away." Offered to take her to the police station, but she refused, said she just wanted to get dropped off anywhere with people around. We pulled up to this 24-hour diner that was lit up like a Christmas tree, and I figured it was as good a place as any. As soon as we stopped, she jumped out, thanked me again, and ran inside without looking back. I sat there for a minute, trying to process what just happened. I thought about going in after her, but I was exhausted, freaked out, and just wanted to get the hell home. The thing is, when I got home and finally unpacked my gear, I found something in the bottom of my backpack that wasn't mine. It was a small wooden carving, like a little figure with weird symbols carved into it. I have no idea how it got there. I definitely didn't put it in my pack. To this day, I don't know what happened to that woman or what she was running from, but whatever it was, I'm just glad we got out of those woods in one piece. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a comment below. Your feedback helps me create more content you'll love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next video.